All right, transcription has started, recording has started. Excellent. So good afternoon to everyone, and thank you so much for taking time to attend the inaugural session of the Hispanic Serving Institutions Division, HSI, Evaluation and Evidence Series. Today's webinar is the first in our new series, and it is entitled Elements of an Effective Evaluation Plan. My name is Margarita L. Melendez, and I serve as the program lead for the POHA program, as well as a program specialist for the STEM program and the DHSI program, and as lead for our Puerto Rico grants. I would like to extend a special thank you to our colleagues and evaluators, Christos Valiotis and Terry Erickson, whom we will be hearing from today, for their kindness and generosity in extending to us their experience and expertise in the field of evaluation. A special note of appreciation to my supervisor and the director of the HSI division, Dr. Stacy Sletovich, and thank you to all of my wonderful HSI division colleagues, especially Curran, who is helping with the logistics and the technical aspects today. Most importantly, thank you to all of you for your tireless devotion to your students and for all that you do every day on their behalf, as well as for your colleges and universities, your fellow faculty and staff, and the communities that you serve. A few words before we begin. As I said a moment ago, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted to our YouTube playlist. So if you need to leave early or have colleagues that missed this session, not to worry, as they can watch the recording later. Also, as I put in the chat a moment ago, we will also provide to all attendees copies of the PowerPoints and a resource packet that we have assembled especially for the topics we will cover today. So during last year's project directors meeting, we held a number of special sessions on evaluation, including a session entitled Reflections on 20 plus years of evaluations and building evidence for Titles III and Title V projects. Christos spoke during this session, as well as several other colleagues who are also evaluators. We also heard from Dr. Matthew Soldner, Commissioner of the National Center for Education Evaluation and Regional Assistance, and the department's Chief Evaluation Officer, and his colleague Josh De La Rosa, who is the Director of Annual Reports and Information from the National Center for Education Statistics, NCES. In addition, during the conference, several of you, our project directors and evaluators, also presented on different aspects of your projects, evaluation designs, data issues, and related matters. There was a very strong interest in continuing this conversation on all issues, evaluation, and evidence related. So the division is assembling an evaluation interest group and will be reaching out within the next few weeks to invite you to join. This group is primarily for evaluators, as well as for project directors and other staff who have expertise in and an interest in evaluation and evidence. As part of this group, we will organize future webinars on topics of interest related to evidence and evaluation. Please be on the lookout for an email from us in this regard. Oh, thank you for the reactions. Great to see that other people are as excited as I am. So the purpose of today's session is to provide an overview of how to prepare a strong evaluation plan as part of the proposal process. Please know that we are using the terms proposal and application interchangeably. All of the topics in today's webinar are related to the pre-award phase for the most part. We will not be discussing in detail related matters to the implementation of your evaluation plan. That is a topic for another time. Specifically, we will be addressing the following 6 topics related to this pre-award phase. The most important is addressing the proposal preparation process by responding to the NIA selection criterion, i.e., quality of the project evaluation. And that criterion has 2 factors. Second, aligning your evaluation plan with your logic model. Third, selecting an evaluation design. Fourth, issues related to data elements, collection, and analysis. Fifth, incorporating formative and summative feedback into your evaluation plan. And finally, choosing an internal and or external evaluator for your evaluation. During the first part of today's presentation, Christos will provide an overview of evaluation writ large and the essential elements of an effective evaluation plan. Next, Terry will dig deeper into the data collection issues and specifically how she assists applicants in responding to the selection criterion, which, as we said, is quality of the project evaluation from the NIA when preparing their applications. Both Christos and Terry have been generous and have prepared documents to share with you that expand on the content that they will cover. And they will be referring to these documents during their presentation. Rest assured, as I've said before, you will receive those documents in the resource packet. Some of the documents they have prepared for you today are a sample evaluation plan with hypothetical goals and objectives, and a worksheet on developing your data collection table. So let me introduce Christos to everyone. I think most of you probably know him already. We are so fortunate to have him with us today. Christos has been recently appointed the Director of the Office of Grants and Innovation at Antelope Valley College in Lancaster. Previously, he was the Dean of the Department of Mathematics and Science at the same college. He is a graduate of Long Beach State, and he did his doctoral work in evaluation and assessment. Christos has just a plethora of experience working with our Titles 3 and 5 project. He also works closely with NSF, evaluating a number of their projects. And he emphasizes that as a first-generation college graduate and immigrant, he has championed interventions to increase Hispanic student outcomes for well over a decade. So thank you, Christos, so much for being with us here today. Terry Erickson is the CEO and principal investigator of Erickson Consulting Services, LLC. She also has a wealth of experience designing evaluation for programs. And just as with Christos, in addition to being an evaluator, she has also written a number of very successful grants and served as a project director. She has also been involved with OSSI and with Haku. And in 2014, she started her own consulting company to increase HSIs across the nation, successfully securing and implementing grant programs. We are so grateful to have Terry with us here today as well. Thank you both so much for making the time to be with us. Moving on then to the next slide. This slide is really meant to provide context for the content that we'll be going over today. By reminding us as we move forward, the HSI division's evidence standards and evaluation requirements. So on the left-hand side, we are reminded of the evidence standards for the Titles 3 and 5 programs. And these are two. The first is demonstrates a rationale, which an applicant demonstrates by including a logic model. And second, including promised evidence studies as part of their evaluation plan, incorporated into their logic model and on the required evidence form. Where you respond to these evidence standards is in the NIA selection criterion quality of the project design. And each of those two factors speak to the demonstrates a rationale and to the promising evidence standards. The second part, and what we will be mostly concentrating on today, are the evaluation requirements. As you can see, our evaluation requirements are very straightforward and speak mainly to the issues of the evaluation plan: data elements, data collection, and data analysis, as well as including formative and summative results in your evaluation plan. The selection criterion does not speak to using an internal or external evaluator, nor does it require a specific evaluation design. However, we understand that these are important points and should be considered as you develop your evaluation plan. Therefore, these topics will be covered in today's session. Moving on then, I mentioned our resource packet, and in addition to the documents that Christos and Terry's have prepared for you, we are also providing you with a number of helpful articles and other documents specifically related to the topics of today's webinar. So the first is the IES-REL Program Evaluation Toolkit, and the next slide will go into that in some detail. But REL is the IES's regional educational laboratory, and this program evaluation toolkit is one of the most new resources that we have available for our grantees and the education community. I'll speak about that more in a moment. The second item on the list is the Ed non-regulatory guidance. All of these are hyperlinked, by the way. The non-regulatory guidance is to provide information to SEAs, LEAs, colleges and universities, educators, researchers, and others with information on selecting, using, and building evidence-based activities, strategies, and interventions. So this second document is most helpful to you as you design your projects and develop your logic models. The second item is a link, the third item is a link to the OSEP Ideas That Work website. So OSEP is the department's Office of Special Education Programs. And I encourage you to take a look at that as you have time, because they have a ton of great content on evaluation, logic models, and related matters. The last article in your research packet is called Hiring a Third-Party Evaluator, and that is from this website. There is also another document called Linking Expectations in Evaluations, using your logic model to create your evaluation plan, which is one of the best guides of its kind for designing your evaluation plan with your logic model in mind. The next two links are from the SEED web pages. The SEED is the Supporting Effective Educator Development Program, and it is one of the department's premier evidence-based program. If you're familiar with the I3 program, which is now called the EIR program, that is an evidence-based program. SEED is also an evidence-based program. So these web pages include a wealth of evidence resources, including checklists, in addition to exhaustive evaluation resources that include videos on the evaluation lifecycle and an evaluation resource database that is designed for both non-technical and technical audiences. I see that Curran is responding in the chat, but let me go ahead and repeat once again. These slides and the resource packet will be made available to all attendees. The next bullet is the CDC Effective Evaluation Plan and Program Evaluation in 6 steps documents. These are articles which are classics in the field, and I encourage everyone to review them, as well as the AHRQ, which is a subdivision of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. That article is similar to the Program Evaluation in 6 Steps articles, in that it provides a brief but thorough overview of the critical components of an effective evaluation. The last two videos noted on the slide are from the HSI division that we have developed for our grantees. So we still have older videos on the HSI division webpage, so that is why you see 2 links. All of our new videos will be posted to our YouTube playlist, including this webinar today. I'm almost done with my introduction, but I just wanted to make sure that everyone got all of these foundational documents and resources as we move forward. So I mentioned the program evaluation toolkit from the Regional Educational Lab. So this is just a summary of the most pertinent parts of that toolkit with respect to today's topics. It's a very expansive toolkit. So what I've done here is I've linked and I've noted the 3 modules of that toolkit that are relevant to the topics that we are discussing today. Finally, here is our contact information. as well as the links to the YouTube playlist and to the HSI division webpage where you'll find the older logic model webinar. At this point, I'm going to give the floor over to Christos. As I've said before, we've disabled the cameras. We've asked that you remain with your microphone muted unless you are asking a question. But please know that if you have any questions or concerns, Christos and Terry are kind enough that they will take your questions as they come in. You don't need to wait till the end to ask your question. So please add your question to the chat, or if you want to ask your question orally, you can raise your hand, and team keeps track of the order in which individuals raise their hands. So before I turn it over to Christos, were there any questions, concerns, or comments for me? Corinne, was there anything in the chat that I need to address?
I'm sorry, I was on mute. There is nothing in the chat as far as questions. And just to reiterate, yes, we are sending all of the slides and resources after the webinar and posting this to our YouTube playlist. So please feel free to put any questions that you have in the chat.
Okay, I am trying now to stop sharing. I think I have now done that. So Christos, you can take it away, and I am going to go ahead and go off camera. Thank you all so much. Looking forward to your presentation, Christos.
Thank you, Margarita. Thank you very much for the nice presentation and introduction. Good morning to some, good afternoon to many, and welcome to all. Thank you all for being here. Let me see if I can try to share my screen. Are you able to see my presentation?
Not yet, Christos, but okay. Yes, we can see it now. We still see, okay, now it's in full presentation mode. Thank you so much.
And somebody's going to be watching the chat, right?
Yes, Corinne and I will be monitoring the chat. Thank you, Christos. If you could stop every few slides or so, we'll let you know of any questions waiting for you.
Okay, great. Thank you all again for being here. Let me set the stage a little bit here as far as to how I would like, or how I usually do this. This is not meant to be like a training session, so to speak, but rather that a give and take type of session. So please feel free to ask questions or stop or interrupt if you can. However, you can do that in Teams and ask questions. I put this together mainly thinking, what would I do if I were invited at a university or a college and asked by a grant team to present to them what do they need to do about evaluation? And I put those slides together thinking, what is more important first when they write a proposal to write a winning evaluation plan, and then after they win, how to use that particular plan efficiently, because it so often happens, and I've seen it in many proposals that I have evaluated, or even some of them that I directed myself, that we don't tend to pay too much attention to the evaluation plan afterwards. And I think it's a mistake, because the evaluation plan can be used efficiently to inform future decisions, institutionalization processes, and things of that sort. So that's how this is done. So again, it's meant to be as an information and an informal session in a discussion between us, even though this is done through the internet. So please, ask your questions whenever you're ready. Okay, relevant or not relevant. If you're like me, most of you are trained as researchers. My background is in physics and engineering, and all through my graduate years, I was trained as a researcher. I wanted to make sure that I get an observation and generalize it in a theory. I wanted to prove something with an experiment that I did, or an intervention that I tried to do. I wanted to make a conclusion of how it works and what it is. And I really didn't pay attention exactly what the effect was into other areas. When I got into the evaluation, I realized that evaluation, by the way, to backtrack a little bit, For me, evaluation was something inherent to research that I never paid much attention during my grad years, because research was the most important thing. If I found out that something works, that's it. That's all I wanted to do. When I got into grants and evaluations and being a project director for Title V and so forth, I started thinking, okay, well, a generalization is not enough. I need to know exactly how something applies to something specific, and that has to do with, let's say, underrepresented students. Do all of activities and all of interventions work for everyone? That not necessarily. In research, we were proving something. We were trying to prove or disprove something. When we do evaluation, we want to see is after what we proved, how does it improve that? And what does it improve? So we wanted to actually make decisions about how well does something work, not how it works, but how well it works. And also, what is the value that it gives us? What is the effect that it has on some population? And I can give you a basic example. Let's just take them one of the most recent high impact practice that is very popular out there, undergraduate research. We all know that it works. If you haven't tried it, please do. It's very, very, very effective and very efficient. But we want to find out eventually, what does it do? How does it affect students? Does it improve retention? Does it improve success? Does it improve graduation? I know it improves satisfaction for our students. And I know it's very popular because I never have enough sections for the graduate research projects. But how does it eventually affect the students? This is what evaluation does. And that's what we try to do as evaluators when we visit with grantees and so forth. So I wanted to get that out of the picture first, because research, most of you are, as I said, are trained as researchers, and evaluation is considered to be some kind of a part of it, but it's not really discussed or trained. None of us were really trained in grad school for evaluation. This I have a little bit of a metaphor. You can read that using the soup metaphor, right? A researcher would be somebody who tastes the soup. Okay, what happens when you change the ingredients? How do you change the flavor, right? How does the soup stay warm depending on what kind of bowl you use, right? But the chef would want to know, did they use the appropriate procedures, and also did they use all the ingredients that they were available? Okay, so that's very important in terms of distinguishing between research and evaluation. One tells you what and how, the other one tells you what effect does it have, if it makes sense. I don't know if this is a little too small. I hope you all can see this. So we get into the meat of the subject now, and what happens when you put your team together. Maybe your president or somebody at the college or the university asks you to put a team together to write a Title V, Title III, or any other grant, NSF grant, whatever that may be. So you put together and you come to the point where you have to address the evaluation plan section. I have a couple of slides here that I can tell you what's the easiest way to address that. If the NIA asks you for a logic model, you're in good hands. You want that. The logic model is a big picture of what you're going to do, what you're going to input into the project, what do you expect to achieve in terms of objectives and goals, what are your outcomes, right? Which gives you an overview of how your evaluation plan is going to be developed. So you want to define the purpose of evaluation. Why do you want to evaluate it, right? Identify the evaluation questions for any of you that have experience with NSF proposals that require research questions and hypothesis, and the research protocol through which you're going to identify that. You might be familiar with that, but that's what an evaluation question is. What does it answer? I know many of you are looking at the prompts from the NIA in terms of evaluation, and you address those issues. That's good, but it's not enough. I think it will strengthen your proposals if you identify your own evaluation questions first, and then you discuss how you're going to be able to measure and report on those. When you look at the NIA, you're going to have to come up with a certain number of project objectives. Those are got to be measurable, as you know, right? They must be attainable. And then when you look at those project objectives, make sure you align them with the evaluation criteria. Does it apply to you, to your population, or to your campus? What would be the impact of it? Can they be replicated? In other words, is this something that you can take and that somebody else can take and use it in their campus? If you're going to use a certain activity, a certain intervention, can you tell whether this activity that is applied on a small set of population, like a small number of students that are enrolled in a STEM program or in a teacher preparation program or in a mentorship program, can we actually take this and increase it to a larger scale? My institution serves 15,000 students a year. If we come up with an idea of to serve 20 or 30 for a small scale project, it really doesn't make any much difference to the whole institution. And I'm assuming many of you are also from large institutions. So is my intervention and my activity scalable? And can it actually be institutionalized? In other words, can we show that it's effective enough so that the institution can be behind it and fund it? Or can it be designed in such a way so that no additional funding is going to be required after the end of the grant? Can it be incorporated, in other words, in the existing mechanism of the operation of the college? And you probably noticed that I left the first bullet, effectiveness of strategies and objectives, out of this discussion, not because it's not important, but when we talk about effectiveness of strategies and objectives, it will probably require a whole full webinar to go through this. I wanted to mention quickly here is that when you look at the effectiveness of strategies and objectives, you have to convince the reader that your strategies and objectives are effective, right? They were going to make a difference. Best way to do that is if you look for existing.
How come that's not? How come it's not connecting?
Please remember to mute yourself. I think I
sorry,
see.
I thought it was me. Was somebody asking a question or just so happened, right?
Yeah, I think someone just came off mute.
So when we talk about effectiveness, the best way for you guys to find out what the effectiveness is either develop your own theory of action so you can have an idea of which way you're going to go, or find out what the research has said in other areas and you can copy that and you can use that. It's perfectly okay to use research references from other research studies to show that the plausibility of effectiveness is high. Okay. Then we're getting down to the weeds. Select evaluation methods. Every activity you're going to do, every method you're going to incorporate, every intervention you're going to test can be measured both qualitatively and quantitatively by various instruments. I venture to say I've been a project director on grants since 2000. That's how old I am, you can tell. And about 80% of the time when I describe methods, I depend on basic descriptive data because that tells me a lot. But I still use surveys. I like focus groups because those are really very powerful for any of you that haven't done any. The focus group is an extremely powerful mechanism. Unfortunately, to go through what it takes to develop a protocol for focus groups and all this is going to probably take another webinar, Margarita, at some point. But they're very powerful. You can do your own observations. And of course, you can do case studies where you test different things at different times with different populations. And then you come up with a mechanism through which you collect the data to report it. That's statistically valid, of course. Okay. So the examples, as far as the types of methods, there are plenty. I'm sure there are others out there that don't even include here, but you have a lot of opportunities a lot of examples, in other words, and a lot of mechanisms through which you're going to do your evaluation. Then you need to figure out exactly how you're going to collect the data. I know Terry's presentation is going to dig deeper into that, but quickly let me go over a few things. The instruments that you're going to use, you want the instruments that you're going to use to provide you the data, okay? So those instruments will be the surveys or the questionnaires, the interview protocols, as I mentioned, for the focus groups, a very powerful technique, a checklist and so forth, right? So But after that, then you get into the big question, and I will expand on that a little bit later in another slide. You have to identify what your population is, what your sample is, and what your sampling method is. So you wanted to create a situation of reporting statistically significant data, and in order to do that, in statistics and in evaluation, we have to have a clear articulation of what is our population that we serve. We cannot, most of the time, we cannot survey 16, 20, 50,000 students. We can design what, we can agree on a sample and what is our sampling method, okay? So, and also what is the sample size, right? There's a statistical mechanism that tells us that for a certain number of population, this particular number of size is important, then we have to sample this many. And the sampling method usually has to be random if you can. If not, then you do a purposive sampling, which is a non-probability sampling. That means that, you know, if your sample size is 100 and you have 1,000 for a population, you go, randomly. You pick the first person, the 11th person, the 21st person, the 31st person, the 41st person, and so forth until you get 100, or you choose whichever other way you want to. You have an issue with education, however. You know, these mechanisms work very well. The first three bullets work very well when you have easily identified samples and methods and populations. In education, however, we cannot use what the medical profession calls a double-blind study, right? Where we randomly pick people and you give them the placebo, and then randomly pick people and we give them the intervention or the medicine or whatever that may be. We can't do that in education because most of us work in institutions where the students self-select to come to us. There is no other way to be done. So we have to figure out a way of how to choose homogeneous groups, right, that are based on a certain characteristic. And what I mean by that, in my institution, my population is about 70% underrepresented minorities in terms of enrollment, and of those, about 55% are Hispanic. Actually, I should say 80% underrepresented minorities, and about 20% African American. And we know that 10 of the 12 feeder high schools to our institutions have very similar characteristics of students being part of it. So if I want to choose a sample of community college students at Antelope Valley College in Lancaster, California, then I have a very high confidence that if I choose a random sample, I'm going to get students who are very closely in terms of educational attainment, GPA, ethnicity, and so forth, right? Is it ideal? No. I can still find out who are they and what they're doing with the survey. But if you're in a situation where your population, your enrollment is totally different than ours, then you still have to make sure you choose the proper sample for your test and for what you're going to do. Now, some of you will say, really, we have to do all that stuff? I mean, we can really not serve students, right? So we bypass this process and we simply serve the students and we collect the data and see what happens. And I know that I've done this before, but if you really want to report a research-based study of how your effect was, you really need to get into this sampling and the proper choice of your sample and your population and so forth. If your institution has an IRB process, then please follow it. Most of the stuff that we do in education, it's probably exempt based on the federal definition of an IRB exempt study. But if you have an IRB process, please submit that. You know, you have to submit to the IRB how we're going to do things, when are we going to do things, and who are we going to work with. And of course, we have to make sure that confidentiality and ethical protections are in place. As I said, that if you have an IRB process, please follow it. If not, most of the stuff that you do fall under the exemption. And we're getting again further into the details now as far as to.
Excuse me, Christos?
Please, yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. We had a question regarding number 6. Wanted to catch you before you moved on
Sure,
to number 7.
Mhm.
Um,
My apologies. I should have
no,
stopped.
no, absolutely not. So this question is from Allison Titcomb, and the question is, anticipating this question on number 6, if this is truly evaluation, might not need IRB approval. If it's research, it does. Thoughts?
True. That all depends on how your internal IRB operates. I've worked with institutions, not my own, if I work with institutions where they're adamant that they have to have an IRB regardless of whether they consider it research or just an evaluation. What I'm talking about here is when you design this particular activity for your project, right? They always consider it as a research part, right? So they have to go through an IRB. But even if it's considered a research part and you can identify that this is exempt, then it's a lot easier to go through the IRB. But when I go in as an evaluator, I don't have to follow an IRB because yes, you're right, as an evaluation part, I rely on what they've done already in terms of the IRB approval, and then I collect the data to review it. When they submit their IRB proposal, if they do, then they always include that there's going to be an external evaluator who's going to be reviewing the results, and I'm covered. So I hope that answers the question. Yes, no.
Yes, go on, Christos. Thank
Uh,
you.
so then this is a critical piece for your proposal. Again, you need to come up with the analysis of the data. What is your plan, right? How are you going to use this? I'm not going to go into the details of this. This is very specific in terms of statistics, using statistics, qualitative and quantitative analysis and so forth, right? And how are you going to interpret the data? How are you going to report your data? That's part of it. Interpretation and reporting. I'm trying to remember now, the NIA for Title V, Title III is not specifically asking us for interpretation and reporting. I know NSF, NIH does ask you how you're going to do that. And forgive me if I'm making a mistake about the Title V, Title III NIAs, whether they require interpretation and reporting processes, but you have to think of that anyway, even if they don't. And of course, the whole idea of evaluation, everybody, is, and we're going to talk a little bit about formative and summative in a second. The whole idea of evaluation is to review and revision. Is the evaluation plan comprehensive? Is it feasible? You have to convince the reader. Can you do all the things that you say you're going to do? Does the evaluation plan align with your objectives, or you just write generalities that don't really match your objectives? And how do you actually, your evaluation plan should have a feedback mechanism that gets input from other stakeholders, an advisory group, whether it's an internal or an external advisory group, experts and so forth. And then you have to figure out a way how to revise it, because an evaluation plan should not be written to stone. It should be a dynamic document. And I've changed in mine very often, multiple times a year, including my logic model if I have to adjust things. Okay, so for any of you have any questions on that, we can discuss that further afterwards or later, or you can email me. But it's critically important to understand uh, that the review and revision is probably the most important of all of that part. Let me get into some details. Before I get into summative and formative evaluation, some of you, I guess most of you are familiar with this. I want to talk a little bit about internal and external evaluation. There have been questions of, okay, which one do we choose, or what are the differences? You can choose either. An internal evaluation is something that is done by either the project management team, the grant management team, or somebody in the institution that works with that team. And the purpose of that is just to evaluate the operations of the project so you can make decisions to make changes if necessary. It kind of resembles, an internal evaluation resembles a formative type of evaluation. Okay, sorry. You guys see this, my slideshow still?
No, I think it went away.
Yeah, sorry. Oh, I messed up something here. You see it now, right?
Not yet.
Uh-oh. Let me know when you see it, Karen.
Will do.
Did I?
I'm not seeing it yet.
Did I mess up? Let me see if I can go and share again. I think I might messed it up. I apologize. My apologies, everybody.
No worries. And if it's helpful, I can also I can share it on my screen.
I think I got it. No, I don't. Oh, here it is. You see it now?
We see
Yes,
it.
we see.
Thank you,
Yes.
Christos.
And we see the slides with the slide deck on the left.
Right. So let me click on that. How's that?
Perfect.
Okay, so back to the internal versus the external. So I would think the internal is almost like a formative type of evaluation where you assess how well are you doing, if you need to make any changes on the fly, instead of waiting until the end of the year to find out what happened. It's something that it's not done easier, but it's quicker, so to speak. In terms of effectiveness, they're both okay because the value of external evaluation, and I'm not saying this because I'm an external evaluator in multiple grants, but the value of external evaluation I think, comes from the fact that you're inviting somebody from outside that has a certain set skills of expertise that can help you with that you don't have internally. Nobody's expecting you to know everything when it comes to evaluation and assessment. The old method of external evaluation comes from the military in the 1940s that was developed by United Way, for any of you that might be familiar with the process and the history of the evaluation in this country, where an external evaluator that's completely objective, that doesn't have anything to do with the team that designed the project, comes into the program, looks at all the data, and forms an opinion, prepares a summary, submits it to the funding agency, to the CEO, to the president, to the whomever that may be. And then that person who reads that report feels confident that somebody externally gave them, a thorough review so that they can either follow or not follow the suggestions. There is also confusion sometimes because I had questions from others saying that if you hire somebody from within the institution, can that person be considered an external evaluator? Yes, it can. If the person does not have anything to do with the project or it doesn't interact with the team on a regular basis and only evaluates what's happening in the project once a year, twice a year, however often they do that, based on the information that is provided to this person and by following the actual evaluation plan, then a person who works for the same university can be an external evaluator to a project. That's very common. But that's not what we're talking about here. I'm talking about the aspect for internal evaluation. You make decisions within your own team. I've been an internal evaluator most of my grants as a project director at Antelope Valley College because I value evaluation a lot. But we also, many times, we have external evaluators where they're external to us and they come in and, they ask us questions and we try to provide the information for them. Unfortunately, well, I shouldn't say unfortunately, I personally do not subscribe to one or the other. I'd like a hybrid approach. I do not like to be an external evaluator where I only see the project management team and what's happening at the university or the college once a year or twice a year, and then just review some raw data that are dry and I don't even know what they mean and what exactly happened in order to collect. I want to be familiar with the interventions. I want to know why did they choose those interventions. So I tend to agree to do evaluations when the people who ask me to do those things, they invite me to be part of their design team from the beginning before the submission. They invite me to actually help them develop the evaluation plan that makes sense to them, because if it doesn't make sense to them, nobody's going to follow it. And also after the fact, I want to continue working with them and seeing what's happening. So that's how I define uh, uh, internal versus external evaluation. And can be summarized by this little picture here with the formative versus summative, right? So formative is when the chef tastes the soup, how does it taste, right? So if the chef doesn't like the taste, may make a change, may add an ingredient, may, increase the heat or something. And then the summative is, what do the guests think about it doesn't matter what the chef thinks, right? Your team thinks. But if your clients, in this case, clients in quotation marks, if your clients, your students, whatever, the people who are in the intervention group, then how do they feel about the interventions? And that's a summative evaluation. Uh, those are brief descriptions. I'm not going to stay too long on this. Those are brief descriptions in terms of how we do formative and summative evaluation. I remember we talked a little bit about this, is the most important thing is to make decisions about whether this should be institutionalized, whether it can be scaled up, and whether something needs to be changed so that we don't wait until the end of the year or the end of the grant to find out that it's something we did, it didn't work, okay? So that's part of the formative part. Then the summative is, or the outcomes evaluation, as I call it. For some reason, I don't like the word summative, but the outcomes evaluation. And it assesses what is the quality, right? And did you actually reach the goals that you wanted to reach? Did your performance indicators support your initial claim whether this something is going to work or not? Mind you here that I'm not averse in finding out that something did not work. I said earlier that I've been trained in physics and engineering. It's very important for us in those areas to find out something that is not a good part of the theory, right? Something that it does not exist. So as much value as we put in something that works, we also put the equal amount of value in something that does not work. Because in education, we can find out that if something doesn't work, then we don't want to spend any more money for it. I wish everybody would do something like this, but it's not happening. Uh, the summative evaluation should include the external evaluator or the internal evaluator along with the committee and the team, right? And it should identify what are the participants, who are the stakeholders, and also what are the relevant outputs. So this is what I said earlier, as far as preparing a report to present it to the stakeholders who are going to decide whether this is going to continue or not, or it's going to get funded or not. Because institutionalization is a big part of our proposals now, you know that, right? So we have to come up with a good institutionalization plan. The outcomes evaluation designs, in order to be able, let's say you want to decide to publish, you want to produce a paper that it wants to be published, you got to come up with a design that is actually accepted by the field of evaluators out there. So we have usually the ones that I discuss here are the experimental type of design, where we have a randomly assigned intervention group. We have a quasi-experimental design, and if you remember the NIAs of Title V, Title III, and other areas, this is what they talk about, because it's almost impossible to do an experimental design for education, simply because we have students that are self-selecting to come to our university, right? And also we have the non-experimental design, which we try to avoid as much as possible, but it can be powerful sometimes when we don't have an option. As you see, the arrow shows what is the ability of each of these three to produce causal evidence about a program. Mostly in statistics, most of the time, we don't say that we have a causal evidence, but we all have a relationship evidence, right? Two outcomes are related to each other without having been able to talk about causal evidence. But in experimental designs, which is what another word of it is double-blind designs, that's what they call them in the pharmaceutical field, so to speak, right? They can actually come up with causal designs. They can say that this medicine causes this. In the quasi-experimental designs, we are able to say that we're close, but not with a 100% efficiency, so to speak, or 100% security that we are making a causal relationship, okay? So those are the three main types of designs, and I know the Department of Ed, they promote the quasi-experimental design because those can be easily done. They're not as difficult as experimental designs, okay? And that's why I have this slide here in terms of saying that so how to come up with a design like this. This is where your external evaluator can help you. If you're not familiar with the types of designs and how to do that, then you can have your evaluator to discuss these ideas of how to do a quasi-experimental design. Remember, you don't have to do a randomly assignment, okay? You have to come up with a treatment and a control group. And that's easy to do because we can do a comparison group, okay? that it will allow you to do that. I will go into another slide in a moment about that. But just to remember, when you choose a comparison group with a treatment group, try to make them as similar as possible. And when you talk about an institution like mine, which has like 75, 80% of students to be of underrepresented minorities, then it's not very difficult really to come up with a treatment group that is very similar to the comparison group. Okay, so don't be alarmed by that. They say, well, how do I do that? There are ways to do this, and that's what your evaluator can help you with. Those are some of the techniques and some of the designs where you may find some difficulty. Okay. What's the major issue with the quasi-experimental designs? We have those so-called confounding variables. We have something that is not accounted for. So if I were to introduce the graduate research project, and I wanted to find out what is the student participation in the graduate research, and how does that affect in terms of student persistence at the university, then I can measure the persistence before students get into the graduate research projects. I can measure their persistence after they finish, right, a year or two after that. And then I can say, well, the students who were involved in the graduate research were retained at this X higher level than the students who were not involved in the graduate research. And that would be perfectly fine if we had totally random groups, but we do not. The confining variable here is the student motivation. What if that the students who were involved in the graduate research really wanted to be there? I did not assign them randomly, right? So I have to figure out a way of how to study the confounding variable of how the student motivation affects persistence. And that's one of the issues with experimental designs, quasi-experimental designs, I'm sorry. That's why we always prefer the fully experimental designs, but we don't have that option most of the time in education. So you have to take into account some of those confounding variables. Let me finish this and then we'll get into some questions. I'll stop for questions. The good thing about quasi-experimental designs is like experimental designs, that you don't have to have the ethical questions. Who will receive the treatment? You know, and because everybody can receive the treatment. Because what is in the experimental design, I'm sorry, let me take it back. In the experimental designs, you have to limit it to somebody is going to take the treatment and somebody is not going to take the treatment. They do have a very good external validity. RCT stands for randomized control trials. Those are the double-blind studies we were talking about earlier. And most of the time are easier to implement than randomized control trials. We cannot do that. I tried many times in education. I could never get anything done and nothing that it would look like a legitimate study. So I gave RCTs up a long time ago, and I'm mostly focused on quasi-experimental designs now. Okay. And I'm very happy with it. I had to struggle internally. And while you're reading the cons, I want to open it to questions if there are any.
I don't believe I've seen any in the chat, but does anyone have a question? Would you like to raise your hand or put that in the chat?
There's a technical definition here, selection bias. For any of you that are not initiated to the field of evaluation and assessment, that might not sound, if I'm familiar. Selection bias is usually when participants in a program, the treatment group in other words, are totally different from non-participants, which is your comparison group. So usually selection bias threatens the internal validity of the program evaluation. Since it's not non-random, there are ways for us to compare the groups to make them equivalent, and I'll show you that in the next slide. But selection bias is a big issue with quasi-experimental designs. So the problem that I have with those is the fact that they may not apply to the whole group. The quasi-experimental designs are good to make decisions about the group that it was intended to serve, right? the subgroup or the sample, but we do not have confidence that it would apply to the whole group. And most of the time, my biggest problem is that when I make assumptions, because you got to make assumptions when you do those designs, when I make assumptions, I'm not always comfortable that those assumptions have been met. I don't have an answer to that, and if everybody has a better way how to do that, they can maybe send me an email. I would love to discuss this with you. But I'm always uncomfortable with QEDs. That the fact of the matter is that the assumptions that I met in the beginning, I'm not 100% sure that they were met. But since I don't have any other mechanism, I still rely on them heavily. I am not going to go
Excuse
through.
me,
Oh, sorry.
Christos,
Yeah.
excuse me. I just wanted to give you a chance to comment. So there haven't really been questions for you per se, but there has sort of been a side discussion based on some of the things that you've said about other programs that have required or that have incentivized through competitive preference priorities alignment to WWC standards. And so there has been some expression of concern in the chat about, requiring more expensive and more complex evaluations because they may not, that may put some of our projects out of reach of community colleges and other IHEs that don't have like the big research offices and things like that. I don't know if you've had any, well, I'm sure you've had experience, but if you have any comments related to that, or if anyone else wants to say anything in regarding to this sidebar conversation, because I think it's an important one, and I wanted to give Christos an opportunity to react if he chose to do so.
If I understand the question correctly, meeting the WWD standards with proof or not proof, this is a QED design will meet the WWC standards according to the NIAs that have been published over the last few years. You don't have to do a randomized control trial to be able to convince the readers and you guys, the program officers, that your research study is valid, if that answers that particular question. The other issue in terms of small institutions not having big research departments that know all of this, it's real. This is where I was about 15 years ago when I said, how the heck am I going to do all this? I don't know what regression discontinuity is, and I don't know what a randomized control trial is. But then I had to train myself, and I found it very interesting. That's why I said in my title that it's kind of fun. I found it very interesting that I actually can do that. And then this is over the years, the last 15 years or so, I've been, getting calls from people to say, okay, can you help us with evaluation? What should we do here and there? And I realized that for smaller institutions, having a full-blown research department is extremely expensive, but hiring external evaluators for a reasonable price, then it may provide the best option for them in terms of helping them out of how to address some of the requirements of the NIAs and what are the WWC standards are and so forth. But again, let me assure you, the way I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, the program officers of the Department of Ed, the way I understand it, that your standards for the WWC are met by QEDs that are really well designed. You don't require, or you don't demand, in other words, you don't require to have a randomized controlled trial included in a project. So I think you should be okay if you can come up with a QED design for you when you do your study, you guys, to whomever asked.
Yeah, that's correct, Christos. So there was a reference to other programs within the Department of Education that through CPPs, and I know just from my experience that it's also done through selection criteria where you get points if you align with WWC standards with or without reservations.
Yes.
So you're right, Christos. None of our programs require that. None of our selection criteria, none of our CPPs have required any of the evaluation plans to meet WWC standards with or without reservations. However, other programs within the department do require that. Again, we are sharing all of these ideas with our leadership, but this is not a requirement that we have at this point. And as many have pointed out, if that were to be required, it may put evaluation services without reach of some of these community colleges and other less resource institutions.
I will tell you that about 6 or 7 years ago. No, actually more than that. 2015 in a national conference that we had with a directors meeting where somebody from NCES came in and we were talking. WWC came in and we were talking. We did have a long discussion on the floor in terms of requiring RCTs for evaluation for education, and I tried to make my point that for education, especially for community colleges or small or public schools that have no way of limiting who's going to apply and who's going to get introduced or not. For selective institutions, yeah, it might apply. But for us who are open enrollment, like community colleges in California, and I'm assuming most community colleges everywhere, or state schools who are open enrollment with very few limitations, randomized controlled trials do not make any sense. And even if somebody tries to convince me that they do, that they can do it, I don't believe that they can. So QEDs is the best thing that we can do, and I'm very happy. I'm uncomfortable in some of the areas, but I'm very happy with the results that we've gotten so far. And I continue to promote them and say that this is the direction that you guys should go. Now, of course, if your NIA says you got to come up with an RCT design, then, I don't know what to tell you. At that point, then you do need somebody who's an expert in the field to be able to help you out with that. But when you get to the point, and I'm going to ask you to read this, and you're going to get the PowerPoint and discuss this. If you get to the point of how you're going to convince somebody to say whether the quasi-experimental designs are good enough, then you have these 4 mechanisms, everybody, to compare the two groups. The reason that the randomized controlled trials are much more powerful is because the groups are totally separate. They don't care, totally random. For us who do not have random groups, how do we get groups that are comparable, right? So we can use these 4 techniques, the regression discontinuity, the difference in differences, the interrupted time series, and the matched comparison groups. Not going to get into the details, to tell us with very good confidence that our groups are comparable. So in other words, we can claim that our results are equivalent in terms of validity as the randomized controlled trials, okay? And if any of you have any other questions, detailed questions here, please let me know and we can discuss off this so I can move on. Let me quickly finish up here by discussing things that are confusing when you do your evaluation plan. You have inputs, they're asking you to do inputs, you have to do outputs, you have to do outcomes. Okay, I'll give you guys 20 seconds, and then internally you figure out which of these 3 pictures, one is an input, one is an output, and the other one is an outcome. So choose among yourselves which one, or vote which one you would consider to be left, middle, or right? Which one would be input, output, outcome, about 10, 15 seconds, and I'll get back to it and see if you guys are correct. Sorry, I gotta have a sip. So we pour, we sip, and we yum. Which one of these 3 is the input? Which one is the output? Which one is the outcome? And I hope you guys got it right. So we pour the tea. We're sipping the tea is an output. It's not an outcome. I hope you understand that. And the outcome is how it makes you taste. How does it taste and it makes you feel? Could be a yuck there, right? If you didn't like it, that would still be an outcome. So what are the differences between outputs and outcomes? Outputs is what we do. So we do workshops, we do training, we do products, we develop curriculum, we acquire resources, we conduct assessments. All of those are outputs, okay? What are outcomes? Outcomes is what difference does the output make? What difference, what value did the output that the workshop, right, that we did add to the institution, add to the students who were participating? So that would be the outcomes.
Please mute your phone. We hear background noise. Thank you.
So the outcomes include short and long-term effects, and in your logic model you will see that, right? Short, medium, and long effects, right? And it also should include the measures of impact. You can't have an outcome if you don't have to measure. Sorry.
Christos, excuse me. Someone is asking for you to go back 1 slide.
Sure. This one?
Yes, I think they needed for you to.
Right.
Yeah, and then just in the interest of time, I wanted to let you know that there are two very meaty questions
Okay,
that are
finish up
pending
with
for
my
you.
last
So as
slide.
soon as you finish the slides, we'll get to those questions. Thank you.
I'm almost done. Is this okay now to move on, or is that person?
Yes, you can move on. Thank you.
So please use or copy this. Actually, you're going to get it. And so what you design your evaluation plan, make a table out of it. I think Terry is going to speak to it a little bit more later. Make a table out of it so when you design your evaluation plan, because the way all of this are here, they designed to match the prompts of the evaluation plan in the NIA. So when you look at this, you look at the overall goal. The overall goal is a very large umbrella. It's the 30,000-foot view. The objective is, how are you going to achieve your goal? Okay. You want to outreach and enroll 50 students in your teacher preparation program, right? Then what is your output? Remember, it's different than the objective. The output is, what do you expect to produce? You want to enroll 50 students, but did you actually enroll 50 students? Maybe you enrolled 20, maybe you enrolled 30, maybe you enrolled 60. So the output is, how many of them did you enroll, right? What is your outcome? The outcome is, what change did you do? What did your goal objective, the meeting of your goal and objective did to the project, right? So we increased the number of students earning STEM teaching credentials. That's the outcome, right? We had 50 students enrolled, we had 30 graduate, and we had 30 more students ready to teach STEM. What are your performance indicators? Your performance indicators, which you will need, and you know, for most of you know, that are new project directors, you know that you're going to need performance indicators when you do your APRs and your IPRs, annual and interim performance reports. How do you know you achieved it? Because you measure, this is basic descriptive data, you measure that 80% of the 50 students, right, that were enrolled to the teacher preparation program graduated. And that's your outcome. That's your outcome indicator, or performance indicator as is commonly known. Okay, and then I'll stop here with simply the resources that I submitted, and I'm going to stop my presentation, Margarita, and then the questions, please.
Okay, great. So a third question has come in, but I will leave that till the end because I want to make sure we have time for
Yeah,
Terry. But the first
take this.
question for you is, Um, could you give us an example of a quasi-experimental design that you've done that has done a very good job with dealing with the cons listed on the slide, selection bias, poor internal validity, etc.? I would love to hear an example of a good project design in your experience.
How about if I give you a design of what we did, but to give you the details, it will take a long time, and I would encourage you, you have my number and my email, to call me directly or email me directly, and I go into the details. One of the designs that we did is, the experimental designs that we did is, when we introduced the last example about the teacher preparation program is a program that we have currently at the college, and we wanted to find out is mentorship and both, faculty mentorship and peer mentorship, how does it affect students' retention, success, and graduation? And the second one is for the graduate research, which is fully blown now. We started years ago, and now we have a very robust undergraduate research program. And we wanted to find out if the graduate research is an efficient mechanism. So we chose students, students who were interested. We put the call out, and then we say, let's see who's interested. Again, the selection bias is the motivation, as I put it into my slide, right? So all of the students, we had to take into account the motivation bias for selection bias, the motivation, the self-motivation as selection bias, right? But we were able to to develop a mechanism to find out that the students who were involved in undergraduate research, compared to a random sample, equal sample for students who were not, how did they do in terms of them succeeding in a particular class, retaining in the field, and we were interested whether they're going to stay in the STEM fields. And in our case would be any of the STEM fields that are, considered STEM, so to speak. And we were able to get convincing results that tells us that both the mentorship program plus the graduate research program were able to tell us that there are good interventions to be able to increase retention mainly, right? but also graduation rate. And an additional piece that we did for the graduate research is to keep track of the students who were who later moved on, right? How many of them ended up in graduate school? So that was one of the mechanisms. And we found out that 96% of the students who were involved in the graduate research end up in graduate school. Again, the details in the mechanism, I cannot provide them here. I would love to talk to anybody off the presentation and give him some details. It'd be my pleasure.
Thank you, Cristo. So let me ask a second question, and then we'll move on to Terry's presentation. So the second question for you was, Christos, if someone wants to learn more about all of this, how to design regression, discontinuities, designs, etc., do you have some guidance for how we can get started?
Wow. Right now, you guys, I really can't point you to any books. So there's plenty of them out there, or any internet resources and things of that sort. I learned by asking people who were experienced. I mean, but I'm from a you know, I don't want to say older. Well, I'm older, but sure. But I like to ask questions to people who are experts, and I like to pick people's minds. And I'm always willing to give advice and provide information to people if they want to reach out to me of how to do it. But in terms of learning yourself, unless you get yourself through a higher level program like I did, my doctoral work is an evaluation assessment because simply I was interested to do it. It's not so easy to learn. That's why you want to hire somebody from external. But you may have internal people. I mean, your research office may have somebody who's very well, um, you know, they may know very well how to do those kinds of things. So please ask them. Doesn't hurt to ask. And as I said, I'll be glad to provide you with some information and advice of which direction to go. In most of the evaluations that I do, we don't have to get into that level. Those are very involved levels, but I would love to do them when I have an opportunity to make sure that I will convince convince Margarita and Jerry and Karen and Stacy that we're doing a good job, right? We know what we're doing. You know, we're not just taking the money and just simply throwing it out there. We want to make sure to report that we actually know what we're doing and it works. So I'll be glad to help anybody outside of this, provide any wisdom, if I can call it that, that I have. Please feel free to reach out because it's not something I can answer right now, how to do a regression discontinuity design, you know.
Thank you so
Yes,
much,
American
Christos.
Evaluation Association. Yes, please do. That's a very good response. Somebody said that. I'm sorry, Margarita.
No,
Yeah, that's
absolutely.
great. That's a great
One of my
response.
favorite organizations.
I should have thought of that. That's a very good point. Thank you all very much. And like I said, you have my email. I don't know if I think I put my phone number there, but if I don't have my phone number, I'll put it on the chat. You can feel free. I don't mind sharing my number.
Thank you,
Call me.
Christos. So I'm going to turn it over to Terry now, but before I do that, I just want to say originally this webinar had been scheduled for 3 hours. I don't want Terry to have to rush through her presentation. The webinar will not end at 3:30. It will continue until the presentations have completed and the questions have completed. So if anyone needs to leave, please feel free to leave at 3:30 or whenever you need to leave. We're recording this. You can watch it later, but I want Terry to be able to take her time and present everything, without feeling like she needs to rush. So Terry, take it away. Thank you.
Okay. To start off, can we all see my PowerPoint? Want to make sure I did it right.
Yep, we can see it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you, Christos, very much for going over all of that information for everybody. I know it can be a lot if evaluation is not something that you do on the regular. So what we're doing today is Christos gave you a really good broad overview of evaluation and some different things that you can consider. And I'm going to take it even a little more focused, where we're going to really talk about the evaluation section in a Title V grant. It looks a little different in Title III, but you can use the concepts. But this is really focused on Title V. And we'll kind of go through what are some things that you need to look for. What questions do you have to ask yourselves? Again, just want to reiterate, you'll all get a copy of all of the PowerPoints from today. Mine does have some hyperlinks in it as well. And then there are a couple of resources that I'm going to try to also share on the screen today so you guys can see them, but those will be coming to you in the packet that Margarita has put together. So just so you guys know a little bit about me, I grew up mostly in Colorado, and my start was actually in journalism. I was a newspaper reporter, an editor, photographer, all of those great things. And I found grant writing kind of accidentally. So unlike Christos, his background is research. Mine is actually in writing grants. So over the years, I've done a lot of different evaluation plans. One thing I want to point out regarding Title V is that several years ago, the evaluation section in Title V was not worth as many points as it currently is. And I think the Department of Ed came in and said, you know, we're really not getting the level of detail that we want in these evaluation sections. So they changed it up a little bit and made it worth more points. So it's really important to make sure that you're addressing both of the criteria. Margarita showed those earlier, and I'm going to show them to you again. And we're really going to talk through what needs to be included in each of those sections. So, and again, at any time, if you guys have questions, put them in the chat, and Margarita will jump in and ask, and then we'll also have some time at the end. So, okay, so this is coming from a grant writer, and I kind of tongue in cheek sometimes say to people, as a grant writer, my job is to get you the points, right? My job is to tell you this is what needs to go into the grant so that you can get funded. So this first bullet point you'll see on here, why is the evaluation section important? Well, because it's worth 10 points. It's 10% of your total score before competitive preference points come in. And anybody who has applied for one of these grants in recent years, you guys know how competitive Title V is, right? I mean, it's a 2 to 3 points off of the top. And then you're kind of out of the funding band. So a little tongue in cheek, but it is worth 10 points. You need to make sure it's not an afterthought when you're putting your grant together. It also illustrates that you, as the grantee, understand how to collect and analyze data based on your planned objectives. So you want to talk about what is it that you want to do? How are you going to figure out if you were successful? That's really the bottom line. It gives you insight on who will be involved in the process. Christos talked a little bit about internal and external evaluation. I'll do the same. And just, you know, kind of quickly, I agree 100% with Christos when he said he likes to see projects that have a little of both because it gives you a really good balance. So that is something to look at. Another thing on the internal versus external, it's not a competition. It's not like, oh, we have to pick one or the other. You can absolutely do both. Let's say if you have a project director who is really, really good, has been doing this for years, has an institutional research background, you may not need as much on the external side because you have someone who's really good at what they're doing. I work with a handful of schools who have brand new project directors, and you know they're still getting to know the regulations behind Title V and things like that. So we wouldn't want to dump all of the evaluation right on their shoulders and tell them, hey, figure this out. So it's good to look at what your institution needs based on resources you already have. Maybe you have a huge, fabulous institutional research department who's able to help with that. Maybe you don't, and you need to write a position into the grant to help you with data collection. So it runs the gamut from very small schools to very large schools. So the most important thing I can say is the evaluation plan is not going to look the same for everybody. So that's one good thing. That I saw a couple of questions in the chat earlier about community colleges maybe not having the same capacity that larger four-year institutions have, and that's okay. The reason we do the comprehensive development plan with Title V is for us to understand where we're strong, where we're weak, and then to develop a project that's going to help you strengthen those weaknesses. So the evaluation is the same way. You're going to figure out what works for you, what doesn't, and then we're going to put the plan together. And so we're going to go over all of that in my part of this session. And then the last bullet point is there's a clear plan for tracking your activities and making changes when necessary. And this is something that I really try to drive home to people, both when they're writing a grant and when they're managing a grant. Just because you said something in the grant, if it's not working, you don't have to keep doing it. That's kind of the definition of insanity, right? To keep doing something when it's not giving you the proven results. So let's say, for instance, you decide you're going to implement supplemental instruction for, let's just say, for a science class, and you implement it, and let's say that students aren't coming to the SI. So the first thing you want to do is find out why they're not coming to your sessions. Maybe they didn't know about it. So maybe all you have to do is market it better. Or maybe they're coming to the sessions and they're still not showing improved grades. If you do this for several semesters and the data is the same, that's when you need to sit down and say, okay, this isn't working. What is something else we can try? Because at the end of the day, what is important is your objectives. If you said you're going to increase retention, you said you're going to increase graduation, that's what we need to focus on. Now, there's a lot of little nuances in there. There are things that you have to get permission from your program officer for, and there are some things that you can do. That's probably a topic for a whole other session, but just know that it's okay to change the way you're doing some things, because you don't want to keep throwing good money after bad if something's not working. Okay, so how do you approach writing your evaluation section for a grant? So the first thing you want to do is plan your activities. What is it you're going to do? What are all of the great things that you have decided will help you meet the significant problems that you've identified in your comprehensive development plan? Okay, so we know all the things we're going to do. Write your objectives. What is it you want to accomplish? Christos showed a really good slide that showed like what's the difference between objectives and performance indicators and things like that. So write your objectives first. What is it you want to accomplish? So the big ones really are based on the performance measures that are in the RFP or the request for proposal or notice inviting applications from the Department of Ed. And they typically are around retention or persistence, graduation, transfer, and number of students served. Those are kind of the big four. And so if you kind of start your objectives there, that's a great place. And then you can determine what you want to accomplish under each objective. So if your objective is persistence, what are the things you're going to do to ensure that you increase persistence? Determine who will be involved. Again, this is the internal external discussion. I talked about that a little bit. And then probably most importantly is understand what the RFP is asking for. So with the Title V grant, the evaluation section has 2 subsections, and Margarita shared these as well at the beginning. And probably the biggest question that I get asked by people writing one of these grants is, what is the difference between these 2 subsections? Because initially, if you just read through them quickly, they could sound kind of similar. So I'm going to break it down for you so you know exactly what information you should put into each of these subsections, to also make sure you're not forgetting anything, because, you know, there's a sure way to lose points when you're writing a grant, and that's to not include something. So, okay, so subsection 1, I've kind of got some bold underlined sections in here that are the keywords. So the data elements and the data collection procedures are clearly described and appropriate. So what you say you're going to do is going to allow you to actually collect the data that you want. It's going to help you measure the attainment of the objectives and the success of the project in achieving your goals. So basically, to boil that down, how will you ensure you are accurately measuring the success of each objective? And I do want to say, just to point out that kind of the formula I'm going to share with you, you have to do it for every objective. And something related to that, I have seen grants that people have brought to me and said, hey, we want your help evaluating this grant. And they give it to me, and there's 17 objectives and 45 performance indicators. And after I recover from the mild heart attack that gives me, we sit down and we go through it. And a lot of the times people are actually making performance indicators. I love the laughy faces. I'm glad you guys got that. People are, they're turning performance indicators into objectives. So not every little thing that you do in the grant is an objective. So for instance, let's see, having 25 students go to a tutor, that's not an objective, that's a performance indicator. So again, keep that in mind when you're writing. More is not necessarily better. You want to make sure that you have well-written objectives that you're going to be able to report on. That means they need to be measurable. Oh, and I just saw a comment come in saying sometimes researchers have no input on the objectives. And that is such an important comment, because I've also had grants where somebody writes the grant, it gets funded, and they go to implement it, and the IR office will say, we don't even have a way to track this information that you have said you're going to measure. It's not possible. So make sure you're including the right people in the writing of your grant as well. Okay, so on subsection 1, how do we start this? You go back to your objectives. So make sure you've clearly outlined your objectives, your related performance indicators. And I kind of say, when people say, well, what's a performance indicator? How will you reach the objective? What's all the stuff you're going to do? So make sure that you have that outlined. It's exactly the way you want it. This is another trick. Always include your baseline measure. It would be the year before the grant starts, and then set a clear target. So if you say you're going to increase retention by 10 percentage points and your baseline is 45, then your goal is going to be 55%. I talk about the performance indicators there. This is another one. When you're writing your objectives, there may very well be overlap in which tasks or performance indicators tie to each objective. Only include it one time. So if you're doing tutoring, unless it's a different type of tutoring, don't put it under the retention and the graduation and the transfer objective. Put it in the one where it fits the best. And the reason I say that is because if you have it in multiple places, then you're basically saying, you're going to, yeah, I'm sorry, there's some typing going on in the background and it's a little distracting. Sorry about that. Okay, so if you have it in multiple places, you're essentially saying that you're going to track this more than once. And you don't want to, basically, if you have it in 3 places, say you're tripling the number that you're going to do. So pick the one spot where it fits the best. So I hope that makes sense to everybody. Okay, so this is just a snapshot of an objective. This is the way I put them into grants. I like this really clean table look, but there's no right or wrong way to do it. If you have a format that works for you, that you guys like to use, definitely do that. And I'm getting some hearts and that makes me feel really good. So I've just put in here a basic objective. So by September 30th, 2028, raise the retention rate for all students by 17.5 percentage points. I am showing a table. Can everybody see this? Somebody just.
Yes, I can see it. It may be that person has a slow connection, but as we said before,
Okay.
everyone will receive a copy of the PowerPoint.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, thank you. Just wanted to make sure my computer wasn't doing wonky things. So one just quick aside that I want to use, or I want to share is, you'll notice that in my objectives, I always use percentage points instead of percentage, because they're 2 different things. Calculating the percentage of something is truly mathematical, and you're going to get a completely different figure. If you say by, like this one, 17.5 percentage points, it's so much more clear what you're trying to reach, because 17.5% of 37.5 is a totally different number, if that makes sense. So that's just an aside to share with people, because I do get questions sometimes about, why do you say percentage points instead of percentage? And then you'll just see on here some basic performance indicators. These were not all of the PIs that we put into this grant, but I just put some in here so you guys can kind of see the thinking behind it, what we're looking at doing. I'm not going to read them all to you, but you can see that in each year, we're increasing our capacity to do the things that we said we would do. So the 3rd bullet point, 5 students referred to support services. If you go to year 2, we've upped that to 10, and then to 15, and then 20, and then 25. I will share this is a very, very small school, just so that you guys aren't like, oh, those aren't very big numbers. It is a large percentage of the students to be served within the grant. So showing that you can increase your capacity through your objectives is a really good idea, because it helps show that, hey, we're not going to be stagnant based on what we did in year 1. We're always striving to do more and to help ourselves help more students. So again, you'll get this PowerPoint, so you'll have a copy of this if you want to emulate it in your grant proposals. That's perfectly fine. So we're going to take that same objective, and what are all of the ways you will measure this objective? And again, I say make sure you tie all elements back to your performance measures or performance indicators and your implementation strategy. So that is to say, if you said in your implementation strategy that you're going to do tutoring, but you don't mention tutoring anywhere in your objectives or performance indicators, you're likely to lose some points there, because there's a whole activity that you're not showing how you're going to measure it. So your objective should include performance indicators that show how you'll meet the objective. I feel like I keep repeating that, but it's really, really important. So for example objective, the college set 3 performance indicators for grant year 1, providing leadership opportunities, holding activities for their meta major groups, and then referring students to support services. So how can data be collected for each of these? So this is pretty detailed, and this is the level that you need to get to when you are describing how you're going to evaluate your grant, if you want to get those full 10 points. So the first one, provide 2 leadership opportunities for students. These are all of the things we're going to track, and you'll see some of them are quantitative and some of them are qualitative. So the number of students who express an interest in the leadership opportunities, how much marketing has been done for that? How many opportunities are you holding? That's a very simple one, because you say we're going to provide 2. Did you provide 2? The number of students at each one, the satisfaction, that's a qualitative piece that is really important, because again, when we talk about not doing the same thing throughout the whole 5 years of the grant, if it's not working, if you do a satisfaction survey of the students who attended the leadership opportunity and they come back and say, I didn't really learn anything, or this wasn't what I was expecting it to be, then you want to go back and look at, well, how can we improve this so that we're meeting the expectations of students? Results from a pre and post test regarding leadership knowledge. I don't think enough grants use pre and post tests or surveys or things like that. That's a really great way of measuring how much students have changed. And it can be actual information, like how much leadership knowledge did you have versus how much you have after the event. Or it can be, did your attitude change regarding something? So there's a lot of different ways you can use pre and post. And then the retention rate of participating students. So if we put this under the retention objective, we want to do a comparison, right? We want to say, okay, students who attended the leadership opportunity were retained at 70%, totally just pulled that out of the air. Students who did not attend were retained at 67%. So we're showing a slightly higher retention rate. Again, this isn't a completely scientific research study. You're making implications based off of the data that you get. So if you keep getting similar data semester after semester, it's likely that the leadership opportunity is making a difference in student retention, right? So we can't say definitively, like, if you do this, this is what will happen, but it's a pretty good indicator that it's a good practice for those students. Okay. I haven't seen any questions pop up. Margarita, has there been anything? Is this a good place to
Yes,
pause?
there was one comment.
Okay.
I don't know if you saw it, but it said, picking percentages and deciding on those increases are also sometimes difficult. So I don't know if you wanted to provide any of your comments on that comment, but I haven't seen any other questions come through yet.
Okay. Yeah. I wish I had a magic bullet for how to pick those percentages. Because one of the things you want to do when you're selecting those is you want to be ambitious without being overly ambitious. So basically, you don't want the reviewers to come in and say, huh, they're only trying to raise it 2% or 2 percentage points, or man, they said they're going to raise it 20 percentage points and I don't think they could do that. So you need to have a happy medium. One of the things that I like to look at is past data on that objective measure. So if it's retention, again, let's look back at what have the retention rates been historically at your institution. We know they all go through fluctuations, right? So what has been the high? You definitely don't want to set a goal that's higher than your all-time high, especially if it's a big difference from where you currently are. Another one is if you're looking at retention specifically of a certain group at your institution, like if you're going to measure the retention rate of your Latinx students, well, let's look at, is there a gap at present between that group of students and other students or white students, for instance. And a lot of times what I'll do, if there's a decent gap, you know, like a 7-8 percentage point gap, what I'll say is our objective is to close that gap. So we would like to have equity between all of our students so that they're all being retained at the same rate. So that's another thing that you can look at. But definitely don't pick the numbers out of the air, but look back at some of your historical institutional data, and talk to some of your experts on campus, you know, some of your faculty members that maybe have had some success with retention, and see what you think is going to be good. But yeah, put it right in the middle. And so I typically, unless there's a really compelling reason to go higher, I think increasing by more than about 15 to 20 percentage points is really setting yourself up to fail. And there are cases where I have counseled schools like, don't go more than 5. So again, where are you starting? If you're starting at 12, hey, maybe we want to set a higher goal. But if you're starting at 80, maybe it doesn't need to be that high. So I hope that answered that question. And I am, you know, afterwards, if anybody has specific questions, I'm happy to answer those as well. So I'm not going to go through this slide, but this is just another example. It's the second. You're welcome, Allison. Thanks. This is the second performance indicator that we set. So you can see again how we went through and just kind of determined what are the different things related to holding a med major activity that we can measure, qualitative and quantitative. And then we did the same thing with the third one, which is the students being referred to support services. Oh, and I saw part of that question. Let's address that. Margarita, can you read that for me? It was something about the 3-year average.
Yes, it literally just came through. You're very good at catching these, Terry.
They're popping up on my screen. I'm multitasking.
Great. It says, when determining baselines, I noticed that you used a 3-year average in your samples. Is that a quote unquote normal range to look at?
So Title V doesn't provide a specific guideline for that. But I feel like if you're just providing a year, if that year is an outlier, like it's especially high or especially low, again, you're setting yourself up for failure. So I have found that 3 years seems to give a pretty good overview. I have also done 5-year averages. So it kind of depends on your student population. Like if you've, like we all did over the past several years, if you've had a dip in enrollment, you know, COVID related or not, you might want to go to a larger average because of course, the smaller your enrollment is, the more skew there's going to be in some of those numbers. So I hope that's good, but yeah, there isn't like, you should do 3 years, but you could do 3, you can do 5. You could do 1. I don't recommend it though. So, and then again, this just is kind of what we kind of came up with for that third performance indicator. You're welcome. You're welcome. Okay, so how do you present this plan in your application? And this is a tough one because honestly, it's a lot of information. If you have your objective, let's say 5 performance indicators with that objective, that's a lot of information. So I always use a table that includes the objective, and then it'll have the performance indicator, and then all of these items that are bullet pointed here. And this is really what you need to have to be able to show that you know how you're going to collect information and present it. So a list of quantitative data, numbers, ratios, percentage improvements, those sorts of things. qualitative data. Again, that's your satisfaction with activities, changes in perception. Alicia, I think you were asking if you can landscape a table. You absolutely can. I do the same with my logic model in grants. I'll do it in landscape mode, so that it's not itty bitty tiny and hard to read. So yes, that's perfectly allowable. So quantitative, qualitative, the time frame for collecting the data, isn't going to be the same for all of your performance indicators. And that's because, you know, some things are going to be done on an annual basis. Some things might be done on a monthly basis. Things such as, I'm going to jump back to tutoring. That might be on a weekly basis where you're collecting the student numbers of the students who've come in and gotten services. So your collection time frame is going to vary from performance indicator to performance indicator. This is an important one. Who's responsible for collection? And I tell you, you better have this in writing somewhere, because when you get funded, if there isn't a record of, hey, this is how we're going to collect this, nobody's going to think that it's their responsibility. So give that some thought. And again, this goes to the internal external question, you know, and also to the question, are there other people needed on the grant staff to help make sure this is done appropriately? So do we need to hire a part-time data person to help collect some of that information? The procedures that you're going to use. So for data, you know, things that your institutional research office are going to collect, you can actually discuss how they collect that data. What is the system that they use? Do you have a student information system that is they're pulling data from? Are you going to create a survey? All of those sorts of things. And then that moves into instruments to be developed. What are the tools you need that you don't presently have? So I'm going to, oh.
I'm sorry, Terry, you asked for the questions as they were coming in. So
yes,
on the preceding slide, we have a question here that says, in the qualitative evaluation plan, what do you think are expectations around surveying the people implementing the grants, staff and faculty, versus the people receiving services, students? And then she asks, this is Christine Stanley, and then she adds a second comment to her question. Don't want to complicate the evaluation any more than would make us competitive.
Yes. Hello, Christine Stanley. I hope you're doing well. Okay, so I'm just going to read this again. In the qualitative evaluation plan, what do you think are expectations around surveying the people implementing the grants? So I think the expectations are more typically around those receiving the services. That could be faculty and staff if there's professional development that's included. But it's going to most often be students. But as far as like grant funded staff, if that's what I'm understanding from you, that's really where, when you're doing the evaluation, whether it be internal or external, that's when you start getting the information from grant staff. Like I know when I do evaluation, I meet with everybody who's funded on the grant and get information from them. I always ask, you know, what are the strengths of what you're doing? What challenges have you faced? That sort of thing. So we are collecting information from everybody. I'm just reading another comment. Yes. Okay. And I saw some hands up. I don't know.
Yes. And Jerry raised her hand, Terry.
Oh, okay. Hi,
Hey, Terry. Hi. I raised it and then I put it down and I raised it because you're saying you're
like
exactly
this? Okay.
Yeah, you're saying exactly what I was going to say. So I said she has it, so I don't have to add a comment. But I just want to add that we get a lot of questions, general questions about, you know, what is the cap for this, or how much should I allot for that, or how do I pick this or that? But it depends on your project. So when it comes to the evaluation plan and to whom you will survey, it depends on the activities. When I sit in on panel discussions, when we're reviewing grant applications, I hear reviewers state, well, they said they would have this program for students in year one, but they never surveyed the students to see what was needed. Or if an applicant is proposing a lot of professional development, maybe then you do want to interview or survey your faculty. So it definitely depends on the project. So I just want you to always remember that a lot of, because we don't mandate a lot of things, but think about your project and think about what Terry, you mentioned, like your strengths and weaknesses in the school, and what's going on, what are your needs. So all of that, it depends on your school and your project.
Absolutely. I'm glad you broke in and said that, because I also want to share that evaluation is not a cookie cutter approach. So what works for one institution may not work for another. And that could be anything. That could be, hey, we hired an external evaluator and we just didn't get what we needed out of it. And it might have been that evaluator wasn't a fit. And I did see, real quick, when Christos was presenting, there was a question about how do you know who does external evaluation? And the best way I have found is to ask your colleagues at other institutions. So if you're part of a system, or if you just know other people, if you're going to the ASSI conference, I guess this is next month already, ask around. There'll be people there that do it, or people will tell you who they use. So yeah, don't feel like, oh, well, this institution used John Doe, so we all need to use John Doe or Jane Doe or whoever the case may be. There may not be a fit there. So that is just an important thing to mention. And I am going to try to share my one of my attachments that you will all be getting. If I can find it here. Well, I don't know that it's going to let me share it. So in the handouts that you guys are going to get, I'm actually sharing a full table that illustrates exactly how I put all of this information we just talked about for this objective together. So it is landscaped. It's got the objective, the performance indicator, and then I have vertical columns, 5 of them. Quantitative data, collection timeframe, person responsible, collection procedures, and instruments developed. And then right under that, I repeat the whole thing with qualitative data. So qualitative data, then collection timeframe, responsible person, etc. And it's just, it's a 1-page sheet that you are welcome to kind of emulate if you would like to do that when you're putting yours together. But it shows a really easy way to see for each performance indicator, what is it that's going to be collected and how are they planning to do that? I've also included in the attachments a worksheet that will ask you some of these same questions that I've talked about today, so that you can go through and add information. This is just a quick summary of what we talked about. I'm not going to read it. Again, you'll all have this information. And then I want to jump. So subsection 2. So this is where I get the biggest question. How does this differ from what we just did, from this beautiful table we put together with all of our objectives and our performance indicators and all of that good stuff? So the data analysis procedures are clearly described, likely to produce formative and summative results. and they're going to help you achieve the goals of your comprehensive development plan. Now, one thing about Title V grants is they actually ask you for goals in a few different places. So they ask you for your institutional goals, your 5-year plan goals, your grant goals. So there's a lot of places where you're putting in information. So this section basically, what will you do to ensure that this project is helping the institution meet your overall goals? What is it that you're going to put into place? So again, how do you start this section? Review the goals from your comprehensive development plan. And I kind of put in here what section it is for those of you who aren't familiar with that. And then just a little hint, your institutional plans most likely are going to come from your strategic plan, as long as it's relatively new. I've had institutions come to me and say, well, we're in year 9 of our 10-year strategic plan. And I don't know that we want to go back 10 years and say what was important 10 years ago is still important today. So that's a different situation. But typically, if you've had your strategic plan 4-ish or less years, that's a good place to start on what your institution is trying to accomplish. And bonus if you've just recently updated your strategic plan, because then you've done all this great work and you can just use that. So how will each activity in your grant help you reach these 5-year goals? All right, so do you guys kind of see how it's a little bit different from what we put into the first section? The first section is very, very related to your project and your activities and your performance indicators. This might be a little hard to read, but these are just some sample institutional goals that I put in from a grant that I wrote. And again, these are based on this institution's strategic plan. So you can kind of see, oh, and I see a place where I forgot to take out the name of the institution. So little shout out to Lake Tahoe Community College, because they're awesome. So anyway, so on subsection 2, provide an overview of the evaluation plan. This can be in a narrative format. This is a lot of the things that Christos talked to. How are you going to do this? What individuals are going to be involved? Let's say if you've identified a project director who, let's say you've identified Christos as your project director. Well, then we can say, hey, Christos has all of this great experience doing evaluation, and he's going to lead the evaluation process as the project director. You may have a project director who doesn't have experience with that. And so maybe we want to hire somebody with grant funding to help with that. Or maybe we want to provide institutional research office help. You can do that in kind, where they're just providing their help. You can buy out part of a person's time that works in IR. There's a lot of different ways to do that. But so think about what are the things, who are the people, I'm sorry, that you need to include in this plan. External evaluation, again, not required. But if you're not using it, you want to explain why internal is enough, if that makes sense. So you want to go over and discuss, again, the qualifications of the folks that are going to do the internal, what other projects they have worked on before, all of those sorts of things. If you want to bring in an external evaluator, there's 2 ways you can do it. You can actually name somebody in your grant application. And you can say, hey, we're going to hire, Jane Doe. The reason we selected her is she has, 57 years of experience with Title V grants. And, they haven't even been around that long. But whatever the case may be, make sure that you're explaining why you're bringing on an external evaluator, why you've selected that one, and what their role will be. The other thing you can do is you can say, we will hire an external evaluator, and these are the qualifications of the successful candidate. So it's kind of similar to what you would do in the personnel section, where you're discussing the capabilities of individuals to be hired. So it's the same sort of thing. What do you want in an evaluator? Do you want somebody who has managed, multiple grants in the past, who has evaluated other projects? What is it that you think is ideal? So when you get funded, you can put out an RFP to hire an evaluator. Okay, and then again, remember this one asked for the formative and summative. Christos explained that really well, but I'll go over it again. So formative information, formative data, to me, are the things that you are collecting as you go. So that really does match with internal, because it's things like, I did a workshop and I created a survey afterwards, and here I have this stack of 30 surveys that students filled out. So that is formative. It's ongoing. It's things that you're doing as you're implementing the grant. Summative evaluation, that is less often, and summative, it's a summary of everything else. So sometimes if you have an external evaluator, the summative part is that external evaluator's role, that they will take all of this other information that you guys have collected and put it together in a summary report, and make some recommendations, identify challenges, make recommendations for moving the project forward and making sure that it's still successful. So you want to look at who's going to do it. How often will that be done? Most external evaluation, it's typically every 6 months. Some institutions that do a really good job internally do a once a year external. If you really feel like you need help and you just, like, your internal team just doesn't know exactly what they need to do, you can do it more often. I did see earlier there was a question about the cost of external evaluation, and Jerry answered that in the chat, but want to share that regardless of what you charge, you have to be able to explain why. So don't just put in, hey, we're hiring an external evaluator and they're going to be X number of dollars a year. Make sure that you are explaining why it's that much money. What are you getting as a result of it? I think there had been some situations years ago where some people were saying, I'll write your grant for you if you write me in as the evaluator later on, and lock people into a pretty hefty contract. And that's really not the way to go. The writing and the evaluation need to be separate things. And you really have to be able to show a value for what you're getting. So that was kind of an aside. So you can include an additional chart that illustrates your comprehensive development plan goals and how this project is designed to help the institution meet them. So just real quick, here's the, did somebody just say how often is summative done? It's
Yes.
really up to you. Okay, I thought I just saw that pop up and I'm like, oh, wait, I don't want to move ahead too quickly. Typically every 6 months, but it could be annually. And it may differ for different aspects of your grant as well. So if you're doing a few different activities, like if you're doing professional development and you're doing outreach and some student services for your students, that may look a little bit different for each of those elements. And again, this section is where you have an opportunity to really decide how that's going to work best. Now, again, if you start the project and you realize, we weren't exactly right on what we thought, you can make some changes to that. So maybe you said you would do summative annually and you decide, you know what, we really need to have it twice a year so that we're not so far behind on something that we can't make changes. Okay. So then again, here's the goal example. Again, this isn't your grant goal. This is your institutional goal from the comprehensive development plan. So this one was to increase student access through expansion and enhancement of wraparound services. So how is your grant going to help the institution meet this? What activities are you proposing that will help with this? How are they related to this goal? What's the time frame for completion, and who is responsible? And it's going to look something like this. Again, this is just kind of a standard thing that I use. You'll notice that I did the goal, and then one of the activities spelled out the relationship to the goal, the time frame, the responsible party, and then I repeated that for the next related activity. For some of your institutional goals, you'll have multiple grant activities. For some, you'll have one, and there may be some where you have none. Sometimes the institutional goals are something that just isn't being addressed by the Title V grant, and that's okay. But this is just a way to show that, hey, all of these great things that we said we're going to do are absolutely related to what the institution as a whole has decided are its priorities.
Terry, if I could interrupt you for a minute, I just wanted to thank you for speaking specifically about the issue of the different sets of goals that we have going on here. So as you said, one of the set of goals is tied to the comprehensive development plan, which is tied to that first selection criteria, which speaks specifically to the comprehensive development plan, where all of our grants need to provide, strengths and weaknesses regarding fiscal stability, institutional management, and academic programs. So those goals are related, as you said, to the institution's strategic plan. However, when they are designing their project, in most cases, they're not going to be able to address all of the strengths and weaknesses or tie everything to all of the goals in the CDP. So that's where, as part of designing their project and accompanying it, their evaluation plan, they're going to whittle that down to a few manageable goals from that CDP that they're going to be concentrating their project on, and therefore that they're going to be focusing their evaluation plan on. So all of that to say, thank you for pointing that out, because sometimes that does cause major confusion.
Absolutely. And, honestly, I'll just throw out there that maybe a webinar on developing the comprehensive development plan at some point might be a good idea, because there is a lot of confusion around it. So just a thought that I'll put out there. So then this slide is, these are just some additional evaluation resources. I think they're different from the ones that Margarita shared in her PowerPoint. But these are just a few things. If you're new to evaluation or to writing evaluation sections, there's some good information here that could help you. And then finally, we have time for some questions. I know we're a little over time, and I apologize for that. My email address is on here. Feel free to reach out via email if you need follow-up on anything.
Thank you so much, Terry. So before we get to any questions that anyone else may want to have, could we give a big round of virtual applause and hearts to Terry and to Christos for an absolutely awesome presentation, and not just the presentation that's been recorded and you can go back and listen to it in your car when you're jogging. That's a joke.
When you need to sleep at night, whatever.
When you need to sleep at night, but also the packet that you're gonna get. Did anyone have any questions that they wanted to just, you can unmute yourself and ask any questions or concerns at this point?
Margarita, there was an email about my email. I'm putting it on the chat, everyone, okay?
Thank you, Christos. And it'll also be on the PowerPoint.
It will be on the PowerPoint, yes.
That we're providing to everyone.
And thank you, Margarita, for putting this together. You and I talked about this for a long time, and thank you guys for doing that. It's amazing.
Oh, yes, of course. The one last thing I want to say before everyone leaves is that that last article in the resource packet is specifically about the internal and the external evaluators. That's an article from our Office of Special Education Programs. It talks about the pros and cons of internal and external evaluators. There's also a link there if you want additional information on how much you should be paying your external evaluators. So again, we're giving you a lot of resources on these issues. And it doesn't look like anybody has raised their hands. So I think perhaps we can say goodbye. Did anyone from the HSI division want to say anything as we leave? Corinne or Jerry or anyone else? Robin?
No, I just want to say thank you to Christos and Terry. That was a great presentation, and thanks Margarita for bringing or putting this together. This was really, really great, and I'm sure everyone benefited. And we will definitely follow up with more sessions on that. Like Terry mentioned, the CDP, that is something that we will keep in mind. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, and Jerry, and thanks again, Terry and Christos, and to all of you for attending the webinar today. We'll be in touch. Have a wonderful evening.
Thanks, Terry. It's good to see you again, and hopefully we'll be in touch soon. Okay, bye-bye.
All right. Bye, everyone.